Hello and welcome again to this edition of the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association's Capital Dateline. I'm Brad Swanson, your host. We're coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital, and once again we are joined by Jim Saunders, the executive editor of the News Service of Florida. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, so we have literally a week before Christmas, and a few presents have been given to those of us in the inside the Beltway that watch what happens in politics. First, we have a new Supreme Court justice. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. Governor Scott on Friday named Alan Lawson as the new Supreme Court justice. He'll replace James Perry, who's retiring at the end of the year. Incoming Justice Lawson is the
philosophically identical to the old justice, or no?
There's going to be a big change on the court. I mean, in terms of that slot on the court. Mm-hmm. Justice Perry was one of the more liberal members of the court, and incoming Justice Lawson has made very clear that he is a conservative. He has already tied himself to the judicial philosophy of Justice Charles Kennedy, who's one of the more conservative members of the court. But also, when Governor Scott announced the pick, he said that he had looked for someone who believed in judicial restraint, conservative approach to being a judge. And actually, incoming Justice Lawson basically said that's his philosophy. So he's been a judge on the 5th District Court of Appeal for 10 years. So he has a long track record, so I'm sure the governor knew what he was getting when he chose him. He's also the chief judge down there, which is more of an administrative position. But he's been on that court for a long time. He was a circuit judge before that. So he's a long record. I'm sure that the governor's people did their research to make sure that he matched up with the governor. But essentially, when you get down to the bottom line, we've had a 5-2 Supreme Court on a lot of issues, with the a liberal majority in the 5 and conservatives in the 2. That's all of a sudden squeezed down to 4-3. Right. So, whether the outcomes of cases will be different, I'm not sure. But I think the tenor of the court will be somewhat different.
Well, I've heard prominent attorneys speak to the fact that when it's this close, the swing justice isn't necessarily like a legislative vote where they're sitting at this fulcrum, but they become much more of a legal fulcrum, and whoever that swing vote is tends to be much more on a national radar depending on how that court goes. Typically when they defy what their bias vote is, when they don't go 4-3 or they go 3-4 for a conservative.
Well, there's a lot of issues out there like death penalty cases right now, which don't necessarily cut as cleanly as some of the other issues that get a lot of attention. A lot of the civil legal stuff. The divisions on that court have been pretty clear. But death penalty cases, for instance, there's a lot of litigation about Florida's death penalty at this point. And those cases sometimes can be kind of murky. So, yeah, it's always hard to know, though, what really goes on behind closed doors when the justices are back there debating how they're going to rule on these cases. So, but I think it's definitely a conservative voice in that room that they have not had over the past, 8 or 9 years. There's not been a change on that court since in about 8 years. So. I think we're going to just see a change in the direction, or at least of the tenor of the court going forward.
All right. Well, let's shift away from inside the lofty halls of our courthouses out to where every Floridian can identify, and that's our tourism. Our tourism sector is arguably the largest driver right now in Florida's economy, and the agency that promotes Florida globally has been under fire or experiencing some dramatic pains over the last week. What happened?
Well, this has been a sort of bizarre turn of events over the past couple of weeks. The whole controversy really arose because Visit Florida, which is a public-private agency that gets tax dollars to promote Florida's tourism industry, had signed a contract, I guess a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, with Pitbull, the rapper out of Miami. And the Richard Corcoran, the new House Speaker, has made a big priority of attacking A lot of these deals were economic development.
Right. Some would argue it's scrutinizing versus
Well,
attacking.
I mean,
but yeah.
if you look at what he's saying, he's going after him pretty hard.
Right.
You can use the verb you want,
Right.
but I mean, he's going after him. And it turned out that this Pitbull contract, Pitbull's production company wouldn't release it. They said it was, that the terms were not to be disclosed, which kind of fueled this whole question about the way Visit Florida spends money. Transparency.
Right.
Also, there's frankly just legal questions about whether this contract could be kept secret. Richard Corcoran, the speaker, and his leadership filed a lawsuit last week in Leon County Circuit Court to get this contract released. Turned out that Pitbull, a couple days later, said, whatever. He tweeted out the contract, which showed that he'd been paid $1 million to promote Florida.
Right.
Now, all this just fueled even more this whole debate about whether Visit Florida is properly spending tax dollars. There's also an issue with a promotional deal they've funded with a soccer club in England.
Right. Well, let's look at the numbers, though. I mean, if you think back to the last 4 or 5 years, the arguable value of Visit Florida has been increased visitations, and we've gone from the high 80s to above 100 million visitations, and Florida's economy has rebounded, arguably because of those increased visitations. Now, you can look to a national economy that's recovering and people's pocketbooks freeing up, but people can go anywhere, and they've been choosing Florida more than ever.
Well, and that frames the debate, part of the debate. I mean, Governor Scott has been out there for months, probably years, talking about the importance of raising the tourism numbers. And they have repeatedly made big deals about these numbers increasing. Now, at the same time, the amount of funding for Visit Florida has also increased. I believe Visit Florida gets $78 million from the state this year for tourism promotion. They're asking for, again, I believe it's 76 million next year in the budget year that will start July 1st. That's what's going to be really at issue as this debate goes forward, because the legislature is going to have to draw up a budget, agree on a budget, and there's going to, and Speaker Corcoran is signaling pretty clearly that he is going to oppose that funding. So there's going to be a big debate about it. Amidst all this, last week, Will Seccombe, the CEO of Visit Florida, was asked to resign by the governor, and he did. And there's also 2 other leaders of Visit Florida who resigned. All of this is fallout of this Pitbull and the questions that Corcoran's raising and the pressure he's putting on, and they resigned. So right now we have Visit Florida with going to be going into a transition period as they're looking for this money from the legislature. So it's going to be a pretty pivotal time.
Now, you've had a senator speaking in favor, arguably, of Visit Florida, which is counter to the House's position, or the Speaker of the House's position.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. Senate Appropriations Chairman Jack Latvala, who arguably is he is one of the most powerful people in the legislature because he controls the Senate budget. He came out and said, look, this $1 million deal with Pitbull was a mistake, but that should not tarnish the other work that Visit Florida does, and that the feedback he gets from the tourism industry across the state is that they think Visit Florida is doing a good job of promoting the state. So Senator Latvala, to me, laid down a marker, said, as we go into these budget negotiations, we find value in Visit Florida. You got the House saying they don't want to spend money. I mean, this is all part of a bigger philosophical debate too. I mean, as I indicated, Corcoran has gone after Enterprise Florida, which is the recruits businesses. He's gone after Visit Florida, and he's made a big deal about attacking what he calls corporate welfare. Yeah. So this is going to be a big debate that shapes up during this session in the coming months. I do think, just if you step back and look at it, Visit Florida is. What it does and its function is different than Enterprise Florida. Right. Enterprise Florida, there's always these questions about, if you send money to Enterprise Florida, how is it getting parceled out to the corporations in terms of tax breaks and those sorts of things, and whether companies are just playing off the state against other states, and there's a lot of more murkiness to me in terms of what Enterprise Florida does.
Yeah, the economic development studies, conversely for tourism, show that cyclical effect of those dollars, and they're green, if you will. People come, stay, invest, and then they go.
I guess the way I look at it is, if you see a TV ad that says promoting Florida, it's a little bit more direct. The way the money is being used is more direct than potentially the way Enterprise Florida uses money. So I think there's some different dynamics about that debate that might emerge here in the next few months. But it's shaping up to be a big philosophical debate, House, Senate. I think Governor Scott's he's indicated in a letter he wrote last week about the changes at Visit Florida. It indicated to me that he sees a lot of value in Visit Florida, even though they're making these changes to get rid, changing their leadership. So I think he may push pretty hard to keep some funding, maybe not at the level they've wanted, but he's going to look for funding for them.
Well, arguably, the state of Florida investing in Mr. 305 worldwide was risky. Then that's all the way in Miami, and arguably a global play. Now let's bring it back to Tallahassee. Let's go into the Senate chambers, where instead of being risky in Mr. 305 worldwide, we're now talking about how the Senate is a conservative body. Is it?
I don't know. I was trying to think of the area code for Stewart.
Right.
And Mr. Whatever, Joe Negron, the Senate president, made some interesting comments last week about. He is from Stewart, by the way.
Right. Yes.
He made some interesting comments last week about how conservative the Senate is, and he was taking umbrage at this notion out there that the House is the conservative chamber and the Senate is the moderate chamber. I think he was trying to send a message.
Where did he do this? Where did
he was speaking to his committee chairs and also staff directors, and basically taking issue with this whole notion that the House is the conservative chamber. I think historically, everybody's looked at the Senate as a more moderate chamber. If nothing else, the senators have larger districts to run in, and they have to represent larger areas. You see that particularly in areas like Miami, where a lot of some of the senators take more moderate positions, particularly on social issues, gun issues, for instance, and so. But Senator Negron wanted to make it very clear that he views the Senate as conservative and not a moderate body. I tend to think part of this is just the fact of what we're coming out of in the election cycle. I mean, the Republican base turned out to be pretty conservative in this cycle. So
and maybe the MPAs are as well, because arguably they could have been voting for Trump and conservative principles.
I don't think he wants to be labeled in this environment as being a moderate or playing nice with the Democrats.
Right.
But he used, for example, he said he wants to, this goes to the whole corporate welfare thing. He said, there's a tax break that goes to the insurance company industry every year. We should take that tax break away. It's corporate welfare. So he's trying to also play the sort of conservative cards. I think it'll just be something that plays out over time. I mean, we've seen some Senate Republicans over time join with Senate Democrats on big issues. Pension reform being one that's been out there for years. They have blocked a lot of changes in the state pension system. A coalition of Republicans and Democrats. There's been some education issues that are like that. So I mean, I think we're just going to have to see how it plays out over the next few months. But he was clearly trying to send a message that he doesn't want to be labeled as the moderate branch as they go into session with Speaker Corcoran clearly taking conservative stances.
Right. Well, from conservatism to global tourism, back into the Supreme Court, I mean, what couldn't be more of a gift to those of us that follow this process?
Well, we haven't slowed down around the holidays yet.
Right. Well, Jim, thank you. That's all the time we have for today, and we look forward to getting back with the news service of Florida after the new year. In the meantime, to our viewers and to everyone in Florida, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Holidays from everybody here in the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association and the television and internet industry. Have a great day.